My name is Vanessa. I'm 35 years old, and I work as a senior marketing strategist in San Francisco. Life has been anything but easy for me, but I built my success from the ground up. I have a son, Lucas, who's my entire world. He's 11 now, bright, kind, and the reason I push through every hardship. A year ago, my phone rang on a quiet Saturday morning. It was my mother, the woman who had barely acknowledged me for years. Her voice trembled. "You need to come home, Vanessa. The family is in trouble." Family? That word felt foreign coming from her. For as long as I could remember, there was only one person in my parents' world who mattered. My younger sister, Rachel. The golden child. The one who got everything I never could. I hadn't set foot in my parents' house in 16 years. And if it weren't for Lucas sitting next to me, looking up with curiosity, I might have ignored that call altogether. But something deep inside me told me to go back, if only to finally close the door on the past. When I was 18, I held my acceptance letter to NYU in my hands, my heart pounding with excitement. I had worked so hard for this moment, but the excitement died the moment I saw my parents' expressions as they sat me down in the living room. "We used your college savings for Rachel," my father said, his tone flat, as if this were a mere inconvenience. Rachel had decided she wanted to be a professional dancer, and because her dream was deemed more important than mine, they spent my entire college fund on an elite academy for her. "You can take out loans, Vanessa," my mother added. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Rachel." I walked out that night with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. No one stopped me. No one cared. I worked double shifts, took out massive loans, and pushed through years of exhaustion just to survive. And now, after all these years, they wanted me back. The next day, I found myself standing in front of the house I'd grown up in. It looked smaller, older, like the weight of my family's poor choices had finally taken its toll. Lucas squeezed my hand. "Are you okay, Mom?" I nodded, but my chest felt heavy. When I knocked, my mother opened the door. She looked tired, her face lined with stress. Behind her, my father sat in his usual chair in the living room, his silver hair disheveled. And then there was Rachel lounging on the couch, as if she didn't have a care in the world. I stepped inside, my son following me. My mother's eyes finally landed on him, widening in shock. "Oh my God," she whispered. My father blinked, as if he had just realized his grandson existed. Lucas stood there politely, his resemblance to me unmistakable. He's grown so much," my mother finally said, reaching out hesitantly. "He looks just like you. Do you like sports, kiddo?" my father asked, trying to sound warm. "I could teach you golf." I nearly laughed. They had ignored me for years, but suddenly, now that there was another extension of me in front of them, they wanted to play grandparents? "Let's cut to the chase," I said, arms crossed. "Why am I here?" My mother's face crumpled. "Vanessa, we're about to lose the house. The bank is seizing it." I exhaled slowly, my stomach twisting. "Rachel took out a huge loan to open her yoga studio," my mother continued. "It failed, so we mortgaged the house to help her. Now, we're drowning in debt." Rachel barely flinched. She just rolled her eyes, as if this were all a minor inconvenience. "And you want me to bail you out?" I asked, already knowing the answer. My father cleared his throat. "You have a great job, Vanessa. Helping us a little wouldn't hurt." I clenched my fists. 16 years. 16 years of silence. And now, suddenly, I was their last resort. "How much?" I asked coldly. My mother hesitated. "If we can pay $130,000 up front, the bank will give us more time to cover the rest." I almost laughed in disbelief. Rachel smirked. "What's the big deal? You make that much in a year, right?" I turned to her, feeling a slow, simmering rage. "You don't get to talk," she scoffed, flipping her hair. "Oh, come on, Ness. You've always played the victim. You ran off and left us, and now you're acting like we're the villains?" I inhaled sharply, steadying my emotions. "I need time to think," I said. "I'll give you my answer in 3 days." My mother let out a relieved sigh. My father nodded, pleased. "Rachel?" She just smirked like she had already won. They had no idea what was coming. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring out the window, my mind spinning. Lucas sat beside me, his small hand on mine. "Mom," he said hesitantly, "are you really going to help them?" I sighed. "I don't know, honey." Then I picked up my phone and dialed a number. "Daniel," I said when my friend, a real estate attorney, answered. "I need your advice." He let out a low chuckle. "Let me guess. Your parents finally remember you exist?" I exhaled. and they expect a blank check. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I have an idea, one that helps them but keeps you in control. I sat up, intrigued. I'm listening. And just like that, a plan started forming in my mind. A plan that would change everything. 3 days later, I pulled up to my parents' house again. This time, I wasn't coming in blind. I had a plan, one that ensured they'd never take advantage of me again. Lucas stayed with a friend, and I brought Daniel along. He was dressed sharply, carrying a leather folder under his arm. As we walked up to the door, he muttered, Are you sure about this? They're not going to like it. That's the point, I replied, knocking firmly. My mother answered, her face lighting up with relief. Vanessa, thank goodness. We were worried you might not. Let's get straight to it. I cut her off, stepping inside. My father sat in his usual chair, watching us carefully. Rachel, of course, was sprawled on the couch, looking smug. I pulled a thick document from Daniel's folder and placed it on the table. I'll cover the $130,000, I said, watching their faces shift into hope, but under one condition. Rachel smirked. Here we go. I ignored her. I will buy the house outright. It will be in my name, not yours. You can live here, but under a rental agreement. If you pay me back within 5 years, I'll sign it back over to you. If not, the house remains mine. The room went dead silent. Rachel shot up. Are you kidding me? You're making Mom and Dad pay to live in their own house? My mother clutched her chest, her face crumpling. Vanessa, how could you? I folded my arms. How could I? That's funny, considering you stole my entire college fund without a second thought. My father sighed, rubbing his temples. Vanessa, we're family. Can't you just help us without all these conditions? Like how you helped me when I needed you? I snapped. Oh wait, you didn't. Rachel slammed a hand on the table. This is so typical of you. Always playing the victim. You think you're better than us just because you made something of yourself. I gave her a slow, amused smile. Better than you? Absolutely. Her face turned red. Daniel cleared his throat, stepping in. These are legally binding terms. If you agree, you sign. If not, Vanessa walks away, and you lose the house. My mother started crying. My father looked like he wanted to argue, but deep down, he knew I wasn't bluffing. Rachel, however, wasn't done. She turned to my parents, desperation in her eyes. You can't let her do this. She's trying to control you. Dad, say something. For the first time in my life, my father looked genuinely conflicted. After a long, tense pause, he finally muttered, We'll sign. Rachel let out a furious screech. Are you serious? You're giving in to her? My mother wiped her tears and nodded solemnly. We don't have a choice. I watched Rachel's world crumble in real time. She had spent her entire life coasting by, relying on my parents' sacrifices. And now, for the first time, they weren't bailing her out. With shaking hands, my parents signed the contract. The house was mine. I turned to Rachel. And you? Her nostrils flared. What about me? You're not on the lease. You don't pay rent. That means you have exactly 2 weeks to find somewhere else to live. The look of pure horror on her face was priceless. You can't be serious, she breathed. Dead serious, I replied. Rachel looked to our parents for help, but they remained silent. They had given up everything for her once before, and now they had nothing left to give. She stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. Daniel let out a low whistle. Well, that went about as well as expected. I exhaled. It was over. For the first time in my life, I was in control. But little did I know, Rachel wasn't going to go down quietly. For the next few days, the house was eerily quiet. Too quiet. I knew Rachel wasn't the type to go down without a fight. She had spent her entire life getting her way, manipulating our parents into bending over backward for her. And now, for the first time, she was faced with a reality she couldn't control. It wasn't a matter of if she would retaliate, it was a matter of when. And sure enough, I got my answer that Sunday morning. I was in my apartment, drinking coffee while Lucas played video games in the living room. My phone buzzed on the counter. Hannah, have you seen Facebook? It was a message from an old high school friend. I frowned and clicked the link she sent. My stomach tightened as I saw Rachel's post. It's heartbreaking when your own sister betrays you. After everything my parents have done for her, she bought their home out from under them, forcing them to pay rent, like strangers. I always knew she was selfish, but I never thought she'd stoop this low. Money really does change people. Pray for my parents. They don't deserve this. Below the post were hundreds of comments. People the first hadn't spoken to in years were suddenly calling me heartless, a gold digger, even a monster. What kind of daughter does this? She's rich and can't even help her parents. Shameful. Disgusting. I hope karma gets her. I stared at the screen, my blood boiling. It wasn't just a pity post, it was an all-out smear campaign. Rachel had twisted the truth into something ugly, and she knew exactly what she was doing. I didn't care what strangers thought of me. But Lucas? He was just a kid. He didn't deserve this kind of attention. As if on cue, his small voice broke through my rage. Mom? I turned to see him standing in the doorway, gripping his tablet. His face was pale. My friend showed me Aunt Rachel's post. His voice was quiet, unsure. People are saying mean things about you. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I walked over and crouched to his level. Listen to me, baby, I said gently. Some people will believe whatever they're told, even if it's not true. But you know me, right? You know who I am. He nodded. You're the best mom ever. I smiled, my heart aching. That's all that matters. But inside, I was fuming. Rachel had crossed a line, and she was about to find out just how big of a mistake that was. I called Daniel immediately. She's spreading lies online, I told him. And worse, she dragged Lucas into this. His tone hardened. That's defamation, Vanessa. We can hit her with a legal notice demanding she take it down immediately. Good. Do it. Already on it. I hung up and pulled up Rachel's number. She picked up after 3 rings. Well, she purred, clearly smug. Calling to apologize? I laughed, sharp and humorless. No, actually. I'm calling to warn you. You have 2 hours to take that post down, or you'll be hearing from my lawyer. She snorted. Oh, please. You wouldn't dare. I smirked. You think so? Guess we'll find out. She started to say something else, but I hung up. I wasn't interested in hearing more of her delusions. 2 hours later, Daniel texted me. She refused. Sending the official notice now. I exhaled. Fine. If Rachel wanted a war, she'd get one. That evening, I drove back to my parents' house. Not for them, but for Rachel. I wanted to look her in the eye when I delivered the final blow. When I stepped inside, my mother gasped. Vanessa, we didn't expect you. Where's Rachel? I cut her off. A voice rang out from the living room. What? No hello? Rachel was sprawled on the couch smirking. She was drinking from one of my parents' fancy wine glasses, looking like she had all the time in the world. I crossed my arms. Last chance. Take down the post. Or face legal consequences. She sighed dramatically. Ugh, you're so uptight. It's just social media. Social media that's damaging my reputation and dragging my son into it. I shot back. You don't get to lie about me and walk away unscathed. She rolled her eyes. Oh, please. What are you gonna do, sue me? I smirked. Actually, yes. Her smirk faltered. I pulled a folded paper from my purse and tossed it onto the coffee table. That's your official legal notice. Congratulations. If you don't take the post down, you'll be facing a defamation lawsuit. My mother gasped. Vanessa, is this really necessary? I turned to her, my voice cold. Did you tell Rachel to stop? Did you ask her not to drag Lucas into this? She fell silent. Rachel stared at the paper, her confidence visibly crumbling. You're bluffing. Daniel, who had been standing silently by the door, finally spoke. Actually, she's not. And I'll make sure this moves forward if you don't comply. Rachel's jaw clenched. I saw the exact moment she realized she had lost. She snatched her phone from the table, muttering curses under her breath. A few furious taps later, she shoved it in my face. There. Deleted. Happy? I didn't look at the screen. Instead, I smiled. Ecstatic. She glared at me, seething. You're going to regret this. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice so only she could hear. No, Rachel. For the first time in your life, you are. With that, I turned on my heel and walked out, Daniel following behind me. As we drove away, he chuckled. Damn, Vanessa. That was brutal. I smirked, looking out the window. She had it coming. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Rachel had lost this battle, but she wasn't the type to surrender. And I had a feeling she was already planning her next move. A week passed, and Rachel went quiet. Too quiet. After everything, I expected her to lash out, to throw another tantrum, maybe even show up at my apartment unannounced. But nothing. It felt off. Rachel wasn't the kind of person who let things go. She never had been. And sure enough, my instincts were right. One evening, I was making dinner when my phone buzzed. It was Daniel. "You're not going to believe this. Check your email." Frowning, the first grabbed my laptop and opened my inbox. His forwarded message was at the top. I clicked on the attachment and my blood ran cold. It was a fake lease agreement. Rachel had gone to my parents and convinced them to sign some bogus contract, claiming she was a permanent tenant in the house. In her twisted logic, she thought this meant I couldn't legally evict her. I clenched my jaw. Unbelievable. Daniel called a second later. "She's trying to pull a fast one." "I can see that," I muttered, scanning the document. "She's getting desperate." "Obviously," he said dryly. "But the good news? This isn't legally binding. Your parents don't own the house anymore. Their signatures mean nothing." I let out a slow breath. "So what do? We let her think she won," Daniel said simply. "And then we flipped the script." A slow smile spread across my face. "Oh, I like the sound of that." The next day, I drove back to the house. Rachel was waiting for me, smirking, like she had already won. "Vanessa," she purred, holding up the fake contract. "Hate to break it to you, but you can't kick me out." I crossed my arms. "Is that so?" She waved the paper dramatically. "Mom and Dad signed it, and you can't just evict a legal tenant." I fought the urge to laugh. "Rachel, let's get one thing straight. My parents don't own this house. Their signatures mean absolutely nothing." Her smirk wavered. "That's not," I cut her off. "But you know what? Since you want to play legal games, let's play." I reached into my bag and pulled out my own set of papers. "This is a formal eviction notice. You have 7 days to pack your things and leave." Rachel's eyes flickered over the document. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm dead serious," I said, enjoying the way her face paled. She let out a sharp laugh, but I could hear the panic beneath it. "You wouldn't actually go through with this." I leaned in, lowering my voice. "Watch me." The next few days were a storm of chaos. Rachel fought tooth and nail, trying every trick in the book. She called my parents, begged them to convince me. She tried playing the victim, crying about how she had nowhere to go. When that didn't work, she switched tactics. She called my job, leaving a fake complaint in an attempt to get me fired. It didn't work. My boss laughed it off, knowing exactly what kind of person she was. She even tried getting mutual friends involved, spinning some sob story about how I was ruining her life. But the more she pushed, the more people saw her for who she really was. And then, finally, the last straw. On the 6th day, I got a call from my mother. "Vanessa," she whispered, her voice shaky. "Rachel's packing." I sat up straight. "What?" "She's leaving," my mother said. "But she's furious." "I don't think she's done." I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. "Of course she's not." The next morning, I drove to the house one last time. Rachel was standing on the porch, arms crossed, her suitcase beside her. She looked at me with pure hatred. "You happy now?" I met her gaze evenly. "Rachel, you did this to yourself," she scoffed. "You think this is over?" I tilted my head. "It is over. You just don't want to admit it." She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "Whatever." Then, with a final glare, she grabbed her suitcase and stormed off. I watched as she walked down the street, not bothering to say goodbye to our parents. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. Rachel was finally out of my life. For good. Or so I thought. Because 3 days later, I got another phone call. And this time, it wasn't about Rachel. It was about my parents. 3 days. That was all the peace I got before my phone rang again. I was in my office, catching up on emails, when my mother's name popped up on my screen. I hesitated before answering. After everything that had happened, I wasn't in the mood for another guilt trip, but something told me to pick up. "Hello?" My mother's voice came through, shaky and hesitant. "Vanessa, we need to talk." I leaned back in my chair. "About what?" There was a pause. Then, quietly, she said, "Your father and I, we made a mistake." I closed my eyes, already feeling the tension build in my chest. "What kind of mistake?" Another pause. "Rachel took out another loan," she finally admitted, "and we co-signed it." My grip on the phone tightened. "Excuse me?" She said it was just temporary. My mother rushed on. She promised she'd pay it back quickly, but she didn't. And now the debt collectors are coming after us. My heart sank. I wanted to be shocked, but I wasn't. Of course Rachel had done this. Of course they had let her. "How much?" I asked flatly. My mother hesitated. $50,000. I nearly dropped the phone. Are you out of your mind? She let out a choked sob. We didn't know what else to do. She said she had no other options. I let out a bitter laugh. And what exactly did you think was going to happen? That she'd magically come up with 50 grand? My mother didn't answer. I stood up, pacing. And now what? You expect me to clean up this mess too? She sniffled. We thought maybe you could help. I cut her off. No, absolutely not. She let out a soft gasp. But, Vanessa, no, I said firmly. I warned you. I told you Rachel would do this again. And you didn't listen. You went behind my back and made your choice. Now you get to live with it. But we could lose everything, she cried. I clenched my jaw. Then maybe next time, you won't let Rachel drag you down with her. I hung up, and for the first time in my life, I felt no guilt. That night, I sat on my couch, staring at the ceiling, still trying to process everything. Lucas sat beside me, watching me carefully. Mom, I turned to him, forcing a small smile. Yeah, baby. Is everything okay? I sighed. Not really. He frowned. Is it about Grandma and Grandpa? I hesitated before nodding. Yeah. Are you gonna help them? I swallowed hard, thinking about my answer. Then finally I shook my head. No, honey. Not this time. Lucas didn't say anything right away. He just studied me, his bright blue eyes thoughtful. Then he nodded, as if he understood more than I expected. Okay, he said simply. And just like that, my decision felt right. Over the next few weeks, my parents called me multiple times. Each time, I let the calls go to voicemail. Then, one day, Daniel called me. You're not gonna believe this, he said. I sighed. That seems to be a theme lately. He chuckled. Fair. But seriously, you know that debt Rachel dumped on your parents? Yeah? Well, she skipped town. I froze. What? She's gone, Daniel said. No forwarding address, no goodbye. Just vanished. And now the collectors are coming after your parents full force. I shook my head in disbelief. Unreal. Daniel hesitated. Vanessa, they're desperate. They might actually lose the house this time. I exhaled slowly. I warned them, Daniel. They made their choice. I know, he said gently. But are you really going to let them lose everything? I thought about it. Really thought about it. And in the end, my answer was the same. Yes, because they had never been there for me. Not once. They had thrown me away for Rachel, over and over again. Now, they would finally understand what it felt like. A month passed. Then, another. I heard through old family friends that my parents had sold most of their belongings to stay afloat, that they were barely holding on, that they still believed Rachel would come back to save them. But she never did, and neither did I. One evening, as I tucked Lucas into bed, he looked up at me with those big, curious eyes. Mom? Yeah? Do you think Aunt Rachel will ever come back? I sighed, brushing a hand through his hair. I don't know, baby. But if she does, it won't be our problem. He thought about that for a moment. Then he nodded. Okay. As I turned off the light and closed his door, I realized something. For the first time in my life, I had no regrets. I had chosen myself, and it felt good. Months passed. Then a year. Rachel never came back. My parents never called again. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. I had spent years waiting for them to change, hoping they would wake up and realize how badly they had treated me. But they never did. And now, finally, I had stopped waiting. Life moved forward. Lucas was thriving in school. Work was going well. I was even considering dating again, something I hadn't done in years. Then, one afternoon, as I was leaving the grocery store, I spotted a familiar figure standing near the entrance. My mother. She looked different, thinner, older, worn down. Her once perfectly styled hair was streaked with more gray than I remembered. For a second, I thought about walking right past her, pretending I didn't see her, but something in me hesitated. She saw me at the same time and froze. Then, hesitantly, she took a step forward. Vanessa. Her voice was softer than I remembered. I kept my expression neutral. Mom. She swallowed hard. She glanced around as if unsure what to say. Can we talk? I hesitated. Then, finally, I nodded. Fine, but not here. We walked to a small cafe nearby, sitting across from each other in awkward silence. Up close, she looked even more exhausted. Finally, she let out a shaky breath. I know I have no right to ask for anything from you. I said nothing, just waited. She rubbed her hands together. Your father, he's sick. It's bad, Vanessa. Something in my chest tightened, but I pushed it down. He's in a small apartment now, she continued. The house is gone. The debt collectors took it. We lost everything. I exhaled slowly. I told you that would happen. She nodded, eyes glistening. I know. And you were right. About everything. That was a first. I don't expect you to forgive us, she said quietly. But I wanted to see you. To tell you I'm sorry. For all of it. I studied her face, searching for deception, for manipulation. But for the first time in my life, I saw something else. Regret. And for some reason, that was harder to handle than her usual selfishness. I took a sip of my coffee, thinking, where's Rachel? My mother's face twisted. I don't know. She never came back. Never even answered our calls. I nodded. Rachel had spent her whole life running from responsibility. It wasn't surprising that she had done it again. My mother swallowed hard. I want to see Lucas. Just once. That hit differently. Because I had spent years shutting them out, but I had never really thought about how Lucas felt about them. He had only met them once, and even then, he had been cautious. I sighed. I'll think about it. Her shoulders sagged in relief. Thank you. I stood up, tossing a few bills on the table. Take care, Mom. And then I left. She didn't chase after me. She just sat there, staring down at her hands. That night, as I was tucking Lucas into bed, he looked up at me curiously. Mom? Yeah, baby? Do you think Grandma really wants to see me? I hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, I think she does. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, if you don't want me to, I won't. I smiled, brushing his hair back. It's not about what I want. It's about what you want. If you ever decide you do, I'll support you. He thought about that. Then he nodded. Okay. And just like that, I realized something. I had spent my whole life fighting to be seen, to be loved, to be valued. But with Lucas, it was different because he had always known his worth. And that was the greatest gift I could ever give him. A few weeks later, I got a call from an unknown number. I debated ignoring it, but something told me to answer. Hello? There was silence. Then, a familiar voice. Vanessa? My breath caught. Rachel. I wasn't surprised. Not really. What do you want? I asked, my voice steady. She let out a bitter laugh. You really don't care, do you? I didn't answer. I lost everything, she admitted, voice cracking. I have nothing left. I closed my eyes. And whose fault is that? She exhaled sharply. I don't know where to go. I thought maybe, no. Silence. Vanessa, please, I cut her off. No, Rachel. I spent my entire life being thrown aside for you. I gave chances. I forgave. And every single time, you proved that you would never change. She sniffled. So that's it? I exhaled. That's it. She was quiet for a long moment. Then finally, she whispered, okay. And then the line went dead. That night, as I sat on my balcony, looking out at the city lights, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. I had fought so hard to hold on to a family that never fought for me. And now, I was finally letting go. Some might say I was cruel, that I should have given them another chance. But the truth is, sometimes walking away isn't cruel, it's necessary. Because family isn't just blood. It's who shows up, who stays, who loves you without conditions. And I had finally learned that I didn't need their love to be whole. I had Lucas. I had myself. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. Story 2. In this tale, her buddies used an outrageous loyalty test to groom my girlfriend into cheating on Valentine's Day, and it blew up in their faces. Hello, everyone. Prior to starting today's video, I need your assistance. One of the greatest ways you can help us out is to subscribe, since we've observed the channel is losing some of its popularity. It's simple, free, and helps us continue to provide you with amazing content. Your assistance is much appreciated. Together, let's continue to build this channel. Many thanks. The video subreddit will now begin. I'm going to require your patience because I need to pull everything out of this chaotic circumstance. I honestly don't know who else to talk to about this whole affair, but I never imagined that I'd be writing here. I am a 27-year-old man who is coping with drama from my 25-year-old fiancé. This narrative begins in the senior year of high school. Imagine the two of you standing next to my dad's restored '67 Mustang in the school parking lot. Since my Civic wasn't quite prom material, he allowed me to borrow it for prom. My date just texted me to tell that she had reconciled with her ex or whatever, the usual turmoil of high school. I'm actually going to go home and spend the rest of the evening playing court. Jen, a girl who appears to be under a lot of stress, walks past. As it happens, the acquaintance who was meant to drive her just failed to arrive. Nothing, no call, no text. Her phone is dead as she stands there in her prom dress. Is the battery life of a 2014 iPhone Classic correct? We started chatting, and I'm not sure, dude. It simply clicked. She truly knew what a 289 Vate was, and was interested in autos. Classics 2 was repaired by her father. For me, that was about it. In the end, we went to prom together and had a great time. She had no intention of impressing people or being pretentious, just grooving and laughing with me about the DJ's terrible musical selections. When we went to this 24-hour eatery with some pals after prom, she didn't act like she wasn't hungry, and instead got a huge dish of cheddar fries. The real ones. Understand what I mean. Let's fast forward to college. Since I went to tech and she went to state, we traveled a great distance. However, we managed to make it work. She would either take the bus to visit me, or I would drive her 3 hours every other weekend in my beat-up Civic. When we couldn't meet in person, we would play games together online. At reality, she outperformed me at Rocket League. Don't tell anyone though, since I acknowledged that. I also got to know Jake at that time, the first day of the freshman year. We both have the same Metallica shirt on and are enrolled in the same computer science course. Began to hang out. Discovered that we both like riding motorcycles. I had just received my license, and he had this clapped-out Ninja 250 that hardly ran. Fixing that bike took up more of our weekends than riding at TBG. Jake and I had the wild notion to launch our own consulting firm after college. Jen wholeheartedly agreed with everyone who claimed we were foolish for rejecting our corporate offers. She would bring us pizza and energy drinks as we worked late into the night coding, even though she was an entry-level employee at a marketing company. In order to assist us with the website for our first client, she even learned some basic HTML and CSS. Those first 2 years were difficult, as we were unable to recruit anyone. Man, we couldn't afford office space, so we were living off of ramen and working out of my garage. We would take whatever customer we could find. Jen never voiced any complaints. She would join us in the garage to work on her laptop, order inexpensive Chinese cuisine, and simply be present. Even created our initial logo and assisted us in choosing the name of our business. Then things began to gather up speed. We got a large customer, then another. Abruptly, we had sufficient funds to lease real office space. Jen also received a promotion at work. You see, life was terrific. We found a good apartment and moved in together. I purchased my street bob in 2018, in case you were wondering. On the weekends, she would accompany me on rides, just driving about and discovering new coffee shops, nothing special. When Jake met his 26-year-old girlfriend Kate at a computer conference in the city, everything changed. She was in charge of marketing for this startup, which ultimately failed. But the woman talks a lot. Something didn't feel right when I first met her, as if she were going to a job interview rather than seeing her boyfriend's pals. Somehow, every discussion devolved into this TED presentation about exploiting social media presence and personal branding. Our weekends were easy before Kate, gaming and working on motorcycles, perhaps attending a car meet afterwards. All of a sudden, she had to attend these upscale brunches where she would boast about her network and following count the entire time. But Jake was enjoying it. Began talking about his personal brand and donning these strange luxury clothing. When Jen started spending more time with Kate, the true issue began. It seemed subtle at first. She remarked that my band shirts didn't look well on her Instagram, so she stopped swiping them to sleep in. Substituted these juice cleanses for our daily coffee runs. Then things worsened. All of our date nights abruptly evolved into seminars for professional growth and networking. The girl who used to assist me with changing the bike's oil began to complain about breaking her fingernails because my bike tools didn't match the apartment's aesthetic. She even forced me to take them from the garage to the storage unit, such as, although they kept it a secret, Jake and Kate got engaged on New Year's. At their Valentine's Day celebration, Kate intended to make a major news when she insisted on having this elegant dinner party rather than our typical game night. I should have realized something was up. Jen was an entirely different person once they were engaged. All of a sudden, she's spending outrageous amounts of money on clothing she has never worn before and enrolling in all these professional networking activities that Kate suggested. The next thing I know, Jen has a completely new wardrobe that perfectly reflects Kate's style. She's even attempting to mimic her speech pattern, unironically using terms like personal brand optimization and synergy. I'm fixing some code for a customer deadline one day while working late at the workplace. Jen says she's networking with Kate in a text message. Cool. There is nothing out of the ordinary. However, my guy Chris rides a Road King that has been modified and is sick. Send me a picture via text. There are several suits at this upscale rooftop bar where Jen and Kate are hanging out. The words of this man. While interacting with clients, Chris noticed something wasn't quite right. When I eventually had enough, I tried to discuss it with her. She skipped our weekly game night for another of Kate's networking events one evening after that. Hey, may we have a little conversation? I recall attempting to maintain a relaxed atmosphere while seated on our couch. What? Her eyes seldom left her phone. You know, I miss hanging out. For example, when was the last time we had a game night with a crewman or attended a bike meet? Her expression, as if I had just recommended that we live in a cave or something. God, oh God. Is that the point of this? It's where your small bike meets. In fact, she performed air quotations. Well, Kate's correct. All of this is holding me back. You are being held back by this garage junk. From what? From realizing my full potential. Take a look at Kate. Companies are vying to collaborate with her, and she has 50,000 fans. What should I say to people? That pizza and PlayStation are my boyfriend's go-to networking activities. I spent a minute simply sitting there. Who the hell was this person? This wasn't my Jen, who used to help me choose bike components and get thrilled about new game releases, boost my network. She really made a straight face while saying it, and then she talked about how Kate was seeing new possibilities and that I should be thinking more broadly. She simply rolled her eyes and mumbled, "Yeah," when I mentioned how much she used to enjoy our gaming nights. She referred to our existence as settling, while I was settling after 10 years of dating. I suspected there was more to this Kate than what captivated Jen. I became aware of Jen's constant texting. Every time her phone buzzed, she would jump, changed her password as well. We used to know each other's phone numbers in case of emergencies, but I never checked hers. The man should have seen what was truly happening, but she said it was for business privacy. After that, she stopped attending our weekend auto shows. Since high school, when we initially became close, these meetings have been our thing. Rather, she suddenly became quite interested in the upscale networking events and charity galas that Kate constantly asking her to. Always claimed I could wake up, but in a tone that said my everyday attire wasn't adequate. Jake also appeared to have changed, began missing our game sessions on Tuesday nights, continued to claim to be preoccupied with work, but his Steam status indicated that he was online. He was strange about bringing up Kate or Jen when we did get together. In fact, I began to feel guilty about how my relationship with Jen began to seem like it may be my fault. Perhaps instead of working on my bike or playing video games with the lads, I should be attending these networking events. Instead of my typical jeans and t-shirts, I started wearing business casual to the office. Jen stated the street. Bob didn't match our new way of life, so we even thought about selling it. In contrast to his custom, Jake chooses to host this Valentine's Day party at his house around that time. Kate insisted on throwing a lavish dinner party, although generally we just go out for pizza and play Elden Ring or something. In any case, I assumed that if we pretended to be elegant for one night, we would survive. Jen actually spends 4 hours getting ready before the day begins. I'm not even being dramatic. Since 3 p.m., she has been trapped in our bathroom. I'm attempting to finish some work as I sit in my room. Completed an assignment for a customer, and each time I inquire about her well-being, she yells at me that she must appear flawless. This comes from the girl who used to spend little more than 20 minutes getting ready for dates. At last, she appears with this crimson outfit that most likely cost more than my first bicycle. I don't normally remark on what others wear, but this outfit wasn't appropriate for a party setting. This was an attempt to attract attention. I tried to be casual, like I was wearing a new outfit when I inquired about it. "I should be happy to have such a hot girlfriend," she says defensively. "Hey, dude." "What?" "We had to borrow her car to get to Jake's apartment, so I rode my bike to work that day because the weather was great." She fixes her cosmetics at every red light as she's on her phone the entire way there, hardly speaking to me at all. She instructs me to be quiet since she's trying to focus when I attempt to talk to her about this new project at work. On what? Selfies. Arrive at Jake's house, and I seem to have vanished from the world. She heads straight for Jake as soon as we enter. Didn't even wait for our jackets to be hung up. In these heels, Speed moved over to him. I stood there looking foolish because she could hardly enter. About 8 additional couples, all of whom were buddies from work and college, were present. You know, everyone is dressed nicely yet in everyday clothes. However, Jen appears to be attempting to be on Real Housewives, or something like, as well as her behavior. Man, you know how awful it is to see someone try so hard. Yes, that lady laughed at everything Jake said and followed him around all night. You know, like he was Dave Chappelle. Remember, Jake jokes with his father, negative ones. She's clearly flirting with him by stroking his arm and tossing her hair. Kate, meantime, is silently observing the entire event. This ought to have warned me that something strange was happening. During the party, my boy Chris, who has the Road King, draws me away. "Is everything well with you, bro?" Jen also claims that Chris is the most unaware person I know, and that his wife, Sarah, was becoming uneasy when she threw herself at Jake. You can tell it was awful if he saw anything was off. When it got really dumb, it was dinner. Between the dining room and the kitchen, Jake had these place cards arranged in some way. Jen was able to move them such that she was seated close to Jake rather than me, moving to middle school. I was so forced to choose between Kate and a stranger's relative. The entire meal was simply cruel. Jen is essentially feeding Jake from her plate while sitting in his lap. Who does that? She didn't comprehend what I was trying to express, so I gave her a respectful gaze. She continued saying strange things like, "He looks great in a suit." Jen isn't picking up on Jake's attempt to seem cool by responding succinctly. Kate, meantime, is simply sitting there grinning strangely and observing everything as if she were making notes for later. Jen had her minor mishap at that point. She knocks over her drink and spills it all over that red dress as we're all sitting there finishing supper. Now, pay attention. The same female who previously parallel parked my lowered Civic in stilettos, with a McDonald's coffee in hand. However, she doesn't just get up and dump things like that. She could as well have spewed lava. "Could you please help me clean this up, Jake?" Like those anime females who are attempting to be cute, her voice became high-pitched. At the meal, everyone kind of froze. I mentally counted to 30s. I stared at my plate for that long, wondering whether I was being overly suspicious. Chris looked at me from the other side of the table and said, "You're going to check on that." So I stood up to see how they were doing. It was one of those swinging doors in the kitchen. Slowly, I pushed it open, made no noise at all, and there they were. Jen was doing that thing with her hair that she used to do when we first started dating Jake, and she had Jake trapped against the sink, between them, shielded by paper towels. Uncomfortable and looking angry. Have you ever been so furious that you felt icy? As if your entire body simply enters this strange, serene mood. As I watched my high school love attempt to woo my best friend in someone else's kitchen, my mind simply stopped talking. What the literal fuck is this, Jen? Jen nearly collapsed for a moment as she turned around so quickly. Man, she looked guilty at the time. Seeing someone put on a mask was like that. Her entire face altered. God, oh God. Right now, are you really spying on me? In just a second, she went from 0 to nuclear. It's unbelievable that you don't trust me. What? I can't even speak to Jake without making you envious. This is precisely what I mean when I say that you are controlling. Jake continued to hold those paper towels while gazing at the floor, as if it were a book of cosmic mysteries, uttering no words. A best pal, perhaps? In order to have a closer listen, I could hear folks in the dining area being silent and scraping chairs. I swear that when Kate popped into the doorway, she had a little smile on her face. I went right out the front door, past the couple speaking to one another, and past all of our friends who were trying not to look. As she followed me down the hallway, I could hear her heels clicking on the floor behind me, increasing louder and faster. She called my name repeatedly. She continued to pursue and shout out until her voice, growing more frantic with each step, reached the driveway. At one point, they even attempted to grab my arm, but I simply continued going. I got into my car and left. I saw her shrink in my rearview mirror, just stood in Jake's driveway wearing that red dress, presumably understanding that whatever scheme she had was failing. About 3 a.m., received an SMS, staying at Amy's. Waiting up like this is just another night out is not appropriate, as like I hadn't seen her touching my best buddy. That evening, I wrote, at my brother's house, I crashed. He has an ancient PS4 and a small refrigerator in his adorable basement. I essentially spent 2 weeks living down there. The entire time, my phone was blowing up, like more than 50 of Jen's missed calls. You're overreacting to hundreds of texts saying things like, I miss you, baby. Please come home. You're acting like a silly fool. My brother insisted that I remain where I was, claiming that things didn't add up. I finished work early one day after staying at my brother's house for 2 weeks. I was feeling fairly good since we had recently scored a major deal. Decided it was time to go home and have a serious conversation about things. I kept my arrival a secret from her. She wasn't prepared with staged emotions or a prepared speech, so I wanted to capture her. Since the weather was quite pleasant for February, the first rode my bike, similar to 50 degrees. It's practically summer in Minnesota. Jake's boosted F-150 in my parking space is the first thing I see when I pull up to our apartment complex. I purposely paid more for that location to keep my bike covered, you know. My mind is now attempting to think of reasons. Jake could be there to offer an apology. Perhaps they are discussing their jobs. We occasionally had tech contracts with Jen's firm. However, I had a strong feeling that I still had my key. When she inquired, I'm glad I didn't ship it back. I hear music playing as soon as I enter. Not any music, though. She created the same playlist on our first anniversary. The one with all these corny, romantic tunes that we used to mock but secretly enjoyed. Our flat is small, with only a kitchen and living room. Just one bedroom. Yes, Jen and Jake are seated on our couch, and I can hear them laughing as they enter the living room. They looked personal, conversed, and giggled together. The fact that she was wearing that damn red dress was what made me feel claustrophobic. They set up this elegant cheese board. Because of Kate, Jake is now attempting to appear intelligent, as though it were a unique occurrence. When they noticed me, they both sprang to their feet. Jake began by saying the BS. This isn't what it appears to be. Jen simply sat there in a stunned expression, as if she couldn't believe I was brave enough to visit my own flat. I remained silent. I didn't scream or lose my cool, simply turned around and left. I could hear Jen racing after me in the corridor, her heels from the party clicking on the floor. At the elevator, she rushed up to me, grabbed my arm, and sobbed as she explained everything to me. She asked Jake to come over and discuss me, said that she was attempting to get him to bring me home. Correct, because you have to prepare a whole freaking spread for the chat and wear a red cocktail dress. The worst thing, she continued to make excuses, claiming that she only wore the clothing to appear decent. Claimed that the music was only shuffled. Yes, exactly. It just so happened that the playlist in question was playing. I cranked up my motorcycle and tore off at full speed, without hesitation. Didn't turn around, didn't consider, simply rode quickly, hard. Everything was drowned out by the engine's scream, the nonsense, the treachery, the pitiful justifications. I was not fleeing. That whole fucking mess was going to be left in the dust, where it belonged. I rode till my anger turned into something more abrasive, something colder, entered a garage late at night. One where actual bikers worked was one I know. Men who avoided backstabbing and phony alliances. I took off my jacket, got a wrench, and started working. Unlike the individuals I believed I could trust, I needed to hold something tangible and genuine. Jen was nothing to me at the time. It was only an error. At last, I had deleted Jake. He was no longer my issue. It would never happen again. And me, I had had enough of being kind. I'm beyond being the person who assumed everything. I would emerge from this colder and sharper. I'm far more harmful to anyone who believes they can control me. Notifications on my phone were completely crashing. Jen is trying to gaslight me by emailing me paragraph after paragraph. Nothing took place. You're acting suspiciously. I would never be unfaithful to Jake. Attempting to call while stuttering and leaving voicemails about the need for an explanation. Describe what? He was feeble, that he let this nonsense to occur. because he lacked the manliness to stop it as soon as it began. I didn't require their justifications. Block both of them. Allow the mess they created to drown them. Jared recognized I wouldn't reply to her stupid texts after that. She changed her strategy entirely. The fact that I didn't care about her after she cheated drove her insane, and she went on the attack rather than pleading for pardon or attempting to clarify. Began this enormous attempt to paint me in a negative light. It began on social media first. She keeps sharing nebulous tales about domineering relationships and destructive males. If he doesn't trust you enough to have male pals, you know the kind of person such quotes are about. That kind of stuff raises red flags. Everyone understood who she was referring about, but she never mentioned me by name. She then began to tell folks that I was using her phone while she was asleep. As someone who works as a security system builder and values privacy above all else, I refused to employ biometric locks. She said that I struggled with jealousy and would lose it if she spoke to any of my male coworkers. Since they were the top applicants, I really recruited 3 female developers for our firm last month. The truly insane portion. She took the effort to Photoshop our previous text exchanges in order to make me appear domineering. She showed individuals these fictitious screenshots in which I am purportedly prohibiting her from speaking with coworkers or attending work functions. I practically never text in whole sentences, as anyone who knows me would attest. People still believed her even though it was just GIFs and emoticons. Know what's crazy? I've known some of our pals since college, and they simply abandoned me without even seeking my opinion. I get calls from my cousin Lisa, who introduced us at prom, yelling that she never imagined me to be such a monster, as if we were raised together. Do you honestly believe that I suddenly become a domineering psycho? The worst, however, was the business stuff. Jen's friend Amy, who works at this firm, was informed. With it, we complete a lot of contracts. I was emotionally abusive. Clients start to worry about dealing with us when Amy tells her employer, who then tells others. We had 3 clients withdraw from transactions that we had been pursuing for months. About half of our friend group was lost. I used to spend every weekend gaming with these guys, the guys who helped me work on my bike and attended all of my track days. Simply believed her. One of them even tagged several of our common friends in a lengthy Facebook status update about supporting victims. Like, bro, last week we were actually playing Warzone together and you didn't see any warning signs. The automobile scenario also becomes strange. Jen attended one of our neighborhood gatherings. For the first time in months, by the way, I informed everyone there that I was attempting to regulate her speech and what she dressed. I've known some of these men since high school, and they started staring at me during meets as if I were a monster. My folks began to inquire as well. When my mother contacted, she wanted to know whether I needed to talk to someone about controlling my anger. Just a month ago, my mother told me that I needed to be more forceful at work. At least Dad sided with me, although that led to their entire argument. Began to lose sleep. Unable to concentrate at work. I'm not reading Jake's emails, despite his attempts to explain. I'm getting messages from Jen's friends telling me to examine my harmful actions and accept responsibility. I'm sitting here wondering whether I'm going insane in the meanwhile. It became so severe that I began to save every text exchange and record every call. I started staying away from local places as I didn't want to cope with the stares. I even changed gyms since I was getting backstabbing at my previous one. The only place I felt secure was in the garage with my bike. You know, when it's just you and a wrench, you can't have drama. The worst was when a startup that we had been working with for like 5 years, one of our largest clients called a meeting to voice concerns about our corporate culture. It took me 2 hours to sit there and say, no, I'm not an abuser. Indeed, women in technology are respected. A $200,000 deal was nearly lost because my ex chose to play victim. I really considered enlisting the help of attorneys. It's not only romantic turmoil anymore, you know. She is interfering with my life, my business, and my reputation. I began recording everything, taking screenshots and requesting that others forward the things she was saying about me. My brother insisted that I should wait it out and that the truth will ultimately surface. It was simple for him to say. It wasn't him who saw his entire life ripped apart on social media. I stayed late at the office one evening in an attempt to resolve this issue with our clients. Energy drinks are all throughout, It's been days since I shaved, most likely like a code zombie. My work disharmony begins to explode. I'm being tagged by everyone in our buddy group chat. I nearly disregarded it. Since everything went down, I have been avoiding group chat. Then I notice it though. Screenshots of a distributed email from Kate. Furthermore, this was no ordinary email. With receipts, this was a full-on confession. As it happens, Kate had been conducting this loyalty test behind the scenes. Why? Because she seems to be among those who believe that everyone will ultimately cheat. So, before she married Jake, she wanted to test him. She has a grand scheme to encourage Jen to attempt to woo Jake. Plans are complete nonsense. For months, Kate had been working on Jen. All those meetings for professional development and networking, Jen was being manipulated by Kate, who told her that Jake was more successful than I was, how dating him would improve her quality of life. All of the texts that Kate and Jen exchanged were revealed. It's really insane to read, Kate. Is Jake not more ambitious, in your opinion? The OP seemed to be stuck in his garage way of life. However, Gen Ops is growing his business. The true brains behind it are Jake and Kate. Everyone is aware of that. For months, she had been giving Jen this bullshit, taking advantage of every small fear and accusing me of preventing her from living the ideal life she had imagined. Even assisted her in selecting that red dress, stating that Jake's kind would wear it. The Valentine's Day celebration, too. It was all organized by Kate. By placing Jen and Jake adjacent to each other, she was able to see Jake's reaction and understood precisely what she was doing. The drop of the alcohol was even prearranged. Kate had proposed it as a classic maneuver, but she had no idea that Jen would eventually develop love for Jake and begin to believe all of Kate's deception. She persisted because of this, even after the disastrous party. Since this wasn't part of her plan, Kate was stressing out, as seen by her texts. She didn't really want Jen to try to take Jake. She simply wanted to test him. Was Jen acting strangely throughout the chat in the apartment? According to Kate's email, she was texting Jen to back off, stating that the test was over, but that Jen was no longer playing. She was making every effort to get close to Jake. When Jake saw the text on Kate's phone, he became enraged and forced her to confess. As it happens, he was unaware of all of this. Because he didn't want to stir up trouble in our buddy circle, he had been attempting to deal with Jen's approaches in a low key. By keeping it from me, he believed he was preserving our friendship. Screenshots of everything Kate was teaching Jen on how to act and dress were included in the email. They are talking about organizing the Valentine's Day celebration. Jen is becoming increasingly fixated with Jake in her message. When it became too real, Kate tried to stop it. Jake's texts to Kate when he discovered that Jen was collaborating with Kate to fabricate proof were seen by everyone who had fallen for her falsehoods about me being domineering. Kate assisted her in creating all of the modified screenshots she displayed to others. The group conversation blew up. I began receiving private apologies, and people who had written about supporting victims became very quiet. Lisa, my cousin, called in tears and said she should have known better. The fact that Kate couldn't trust Jake, however, is what truly irritates me about this whole situation. She really brought about the very circumstance she feared. And because she was duped by someone who was meant to be her friend, Jen ended a 10-year relationship. None of the apologies were answered. As I worked on the bike, I sat in my garage and tried to take it all in. I honestly didn't know what to say to Jake anymore, but he continued blowing up my phone. I had to deal with the business side of this problem immediately when Kate's email revealed everything. Jake and I started our business from scratch. However, after everything, I could not continue to work with him. The problem with launching a company with your closest buddy is this. You never consider what may occur if everything goes wrong. Millions of dollars were spent on our clientele, contracts that required us both, code that could only be maintained by him, a complete mess. Jake continued to attempt to make things better, arrived for work at 7 in the morning, daily, leaving notes on my desk expressing his regret and saying that he ought to have informed me about Jen's strange actions. However, there is a reason why bro code exists. When your female acts badly, you let your boy know. That is really a simple friendship. 101. I had to summon our lawyers to an urgent meeting, worked on determining how to divide the business for around 12 hours in a row. Jake said he would buy me out, claimed that I was free to accept whatever customers I choose. No, I also constructed this item, completed a clean 50-50th split in the end. I retained half of our clientele and our old business name. He launched his own initiative. A few of our developers were forced to take sides. It was nice that the majority of the people I employed stayed with me. Jake's new firm lost some talented programmers, but I suppose that's business. The clients understood, at least. Restructuring the firm sounds better than my business partner, it turns out. As a strange loyalty test from his fiancée, let my girlfriend try to woo him. Then one day, Jen arrives at my workplace. I'm not joking. Arrives dressed normally for the first time. A sweater and jeans, similar to the way she used to dress, bringing along 2 coffee mugs. As if it were any other morning. After everything, my new secretary had to hire one. Jen ignored my attempt to stop her and continued walking. As soon as she sees me stating that she became engrossed in Kate's mental games and forgot what was important, she bursts into tears. She claims that she misses riding on my bike's back, playing games with me as I work on projects. In fact, they attempted to give me a controller and said we could return to our previous state. I simply listened to her entire speech, which described how Kate had deceived her, how she had overreacted to the exam, and how she had never intended to develop feelings for Jake. Then she strikes me. All I was doing was acting out a role. It dawned on me then that this was not even about apologizing. It has to do with her losing her ideal life plan. She wasn't wanted by Jake. She no longer considered Kate a friend. She also lost all of her networking contacts. She was attempting to return to her fallback strategy. Me? I urged her to go and never return. Just in case, security flagged her photo. She kept attempting to reach me on LinkedIn, so I blocked her on all platforms. In the end, the entire debacle benefited my business. Some clients, it turns out, prefer to work with businesses that don't have a lot of drama. Last week, I received 3 new contracts, larger than anything we've ever had, even brought on 2 more devs. One of them is a girl who rides a quite grotesque Ducati Monster. Speaking of bikes, this whole incident really produced something positive. I've been hanging out at my brother's neighborhood CrossFit facility, attempting to distract myself from everything. I met Emma there as well. In the parking lot, I spotted her Sportster 883 one day. You don't see many gym owners who cycle, so I nearly took a double take. It turns out that she is not only interested in bikes for show. After class, we started discussing modifications. She truly understood what she was talking about when she talked about preparing for her Sportster. Not your typical combination. Had a discussion about bikes. She was discussing various cam possibilities and dissecting gear ratios. She's really cool. Prior to starting the gym, I worked in it. She was the one who coded their entire reservation system. Has no drama and rides better than half the guys I know. We spent last weekend at a track day. She arrived early, had her bike tuned, and was advising the novices on tire pressure. Those guys who thought Jen was lying all changed their minds when the truth was revealed, and the vehicle scene has been fair to them. I was even requested to judge their upcoming show. Emma will most likely be taken. She truly understands, having spent her childhood wrenching on shovels with her father. Jake as well. After he and Kate parted ways, he relocated to Seattle. According to friends, he's discovering who he is. Cool. While he's about it, I hope he discovers his spine. Now, business is good. I got my garage back. I've finally taken all of my tools out of storage, and things are starting to settle down. When Emma asks, I've been teaching her how to maintain her bike. She genuinely wants to learn too. Not only acting in a fake way for social media, I demonstrated how to change her chain tension for the first time. She gives me a serious look and says, dude, I better know how to take care of this bike if I'm going to trust it with my life at 8imph. I realized then that she was unique. A phony Instagram model was lost by Toll Doctor. I found someone who can ride. Life has a way of figuring itself out sometimes. Edit. Holy shua. Everyone was inquiring about this, and it blew up my email. Emma does indeed ride. No, this isn't another test. Furthermore, I will not be Jake's best man at his upcoming wedding. Edit 2. The street bob is still there. No, Jen never received her collection of hoodies back. You have to let go of certain things. Final revision. Stop DMing me, guys. Requesting Emma's treasures. Instagram. She is searching for players, not for followers.